Japan is one of the most unique and influential countries in history. From ancient empires to a modern technological giant, Japan's path has been full of dramatic changes, upheavals, and ambitious transformations. In this video, we will travel through time to understand how Japan became what it is today.
Japan, an island nation tucked away in the Pacific Ocean, boasts a history stretching back thousands of years. Long before its rise as a modern powerhouse, Japan's islands were home to early human settlements, some of the oldest traces of civilization in the world. Around 30,000 years ago, the first people arrived on the Japanese archipelago. Over millennia, these early inhabitants developed their own unique culture, isolated from the great civilizations of the time. This isolation would ultimately give rise to a culture unlike any other as Japan's history began to unfold. The geographical isolation of Japan played a critical role in shaping its early societies. Separated from mainland Asia by the sea, Japan developed independently, untouched by the major empires of the ancient world. The people who arrived in Japan brought with them the knowledge of stone tools, hunting, and gathering, setting the stage for a remarkable evolution. Over time, they adapted to their new environment, creating sustainable ways of life that would lay the foundation for future generations. The Jōmon period, which lasted from around 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE, marks one of the earliest known cultures in Japan. The Jōmon people are perhaps best known for their pottery, the earliest examples of which show remarkable artistic sophistication. Their homes, made of wood and thatch, represented the beginning of settled life on the islands. They practiced hunting, fishing, and gathering, but they also developed early forms of agriculture, which allowed their communities to thrive. The Jōmon people left behind a legacy of innovation, including the development of tools for both everyday life and ritual practices. Around 300 BCE, the Yayoi period began, marking a dramatic shift in Japanese society. During this time, Japan saw the introduction of new technologies and ideas, likely brought over by migrants from the Asian mainland. The Yayoi people are credited with introducing rice cultivation, which would become a cornerstone of Japanese agriculture. With the advent of rice farming came population growth, leading to the formation of more complex communities. The history of Japan's cultural development would not be complete without acknowledging the profound influence of China. In the early centuries of the Common Era, Japan began to open its doors to external influences, especially from China. This period marked a turning point, as Japanese society absorbed Chinese ideas, technologies, and beliefs that would shape the nation's cultural and religious landscape for centuries to come. Among the most significant of these influences was Buddhism, which would gradually transform the spiritual and philosophical foundation of Japan. Buddhism first made its way to Japan through China and Korea, arriving around the 6th century CE. The journey of Buddhism to Japan is intertwined with the broader movement of cultural exchange along the Silk Road, which connected East Asia with the rest of the world. The arrival of Buddhism in Japan was not a simple event, but rather a gradual process that spanned several decades. Initially, the Japanese court was hesitant to fully embrace the new religion, viewing it with suspicion. However, the efforts of influential figures, including Buddhist monks and Chinese envoys, gradually won over the imperial court. One of the key figures in the spread of Buddhism was Prince Shotoku, a regent and one of Japan's most famous historical figures. Shotoku recognized the potential of Buddhism to unify the Japanese people and strengthen the imperial government. Under his leadership, Buddhism gained royal patronage, and temples were built to promote its teachings. Prince Shotoku is also credited with establishing the first written laws in Japan, known as the 17-Article Constitution, which reflected Buddhist principles of harmony, compassion, and respect for authority. As Buddhism began to take root in Japan, it quickly adapted to the existing cultural and religious landscape. Shinto, the indigenous religion of Japan, continued to play an important role, but Buddhism was embraced as a complementary belief system. Over time, Japanese Buddhism developed its own unique forms and schools. including Zen, Pure Land, and Tendai, each emphasizing different aspects of Buddhist practice and philosophy. No discussion of Japan's history is complete without exploring the rise of the samurai, the iconic warrior class that has become a symbol of Japanese culture. Emerging during the Heian period, 794 to 1185, the samurai began as provincial warriors serving noble families. Over time, they evolved into a powerful class, deeply embedded in Japan's social, political, and cultural fabric. The early samurai were not the armored warriors we often imagine. Instead, they were skilled horsemen and archers who served as military retainers to regional lords, or daimyo. As Japan's political landscape grew more fragmented, these warriors became crucial in defending territories and enforcing the will of their lords. Their loyalty and martial prowess were highly valued, laying the foundation for their rise to prominence. By the Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333, the samurai had solidified their position as the ruling class under the first shogunate. The establishment of a military government, led by the shogun, marked a turning point in Japanese history. Samurai culture flourished, guided by a code of honor known as Bushido, or the way of the warrior. This code emphasized loyalty, discipline, and moral conduct, shaping the values of the samurai and influencing Japanese society as a whole. Samurai were not only warriors, but also patrons of the arts and education. During times of peace, they studied literature, calligraphy, and philosophy, embodying the ideal of a cultured warrior. Zen Buddhism, with its focus on discipline and mindfulness, resonated deeply with samurai and became intertwined with their way of life. The samurai's role reached its zenith during the Sengoku period, 1467 to 1603, an era of constant warfare and political upheaval. This was the age of legendary figures like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, who used their samurai armies to unify Japan. The battles fought and strategies employed during this time shaped the nation's destiny and left an indelible mark on its history. However, the samurai's dominance began to wane during the Edo period, 1603 to 1868. With the unification of Japan and the establishment of a centralized government under the Tokugawa shogunate, the samurai transitioned from warriors to bureaucrats and administrators. The long peace of the Edo period diminished their martial role, but their cultural legacy endured. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 marked the end of the samurai era, as Japan modernized its military and abolished the feudal class system. Yet, the spirit of the samurai lives on in modern Japan, influencing everything from martial arts to popular culture. Their legacy is a testament to their enduring impact on the nation's identity. The Tokugawa period, also known as the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, was a transformative era in Japan's history, marked by political stability, strict social structures, and a policy of isolation. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan underwent significant changes that shaped its society and culture for centuries to come. Founded by Tokugawa Ieyasu, after his victory at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, the shogunate established a centralized feudal system that brought an end to centuries of civil war. Ieyasu's rule created a stable government, with power concentrated in Edo, modern-day Tokyo. The emperor remained a symbolic figurehead, while the shogun held actual political authority. This structure ensured peace and order across the nation. One of the defining features of the Tokugawa period was its strict class hierarchy. Society was divided into four main classes: samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Samurai, once fierce warriors, became bureaucrats and administrators, tasked with maintaining order. Farmers were highly respected for their role in sustaining the economy, while artisans and merchants occupied the lower tiers of society despite their growing economic influence. Perhaps the most notable aspect of the Tokugawa era was Japan's policy of isolation, or sakoku. Implemented in the 1630s, this policy restricted foreign trade and contact with the outside world. Only select Dutch and Chinese merchants were allowed limited access through the port of Nagasaki. The isolation policy aimed to protect Japan from foreign influence and preserve its culture and traditions. Christianity, introduced by European missionaries, was banned, and converts faced persecution. Despite the isolation, the Tokugawa period was a time of cultural flourishing. Art, literature, and theater thrived, with traditions like kabuki and ukiyo-e woodblock printing gaining popularity. The floating world culture of Edo's pleasure districts became a symbol of the era, showcasing vibrant entertainment and artistic expression. Education also expanded, with literacy rates increasing among common people due to the spread of Terracotta schools. While the Tokugawa shogunate maintained peace for over 2 centuries, cracks in its foundation began to appear by the mid-19th century. Economic challenges, corruption, and growing discontent among the lower classes weakened the government's control. Additionally, the arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry's fleet in 1853 forced Japan to open its ports to foreign trade, signaling the end of its isolationist policies. The Tokugawa era came to an official end in 1868 with the Meiji Restoration, which restored imperial rule and ushered in a period of rapid modernization and industrialization. However, the legacy of the Tokugawa period remains evident in Japan's cultural identity and historical consciousness. It was a time of peace, artistic achievement, and significant societal change, laying the groundwork for the nation's transformation in the modern age. The arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry and his fleet in 1853 was a dramatic turning point in Japan's history, marking the end of centuries of isolation and the beginning of a new era. This encounter with the West not only reshaped Japan's foreign relations, but also ignited profound internal changes that would transform the nation forever. By the mid-19th century, Western nations were expanding their influence across the globe, driven by industrialization and the desire for new markets. The United States, in particular, sought to establish trade relations with Japan, a nation that had remained closed to most foreign contact since the 1630s. Commodore Perry, commanding a squadron of steam-powered black ships, was tasked with opening diplomatic and commercial ties with Japan. When Perry's fleet arrived in Edo Bay, modern-day Tokyo Bay, in July 1853, it was an unprecedented event. The sight of the imposing black ships, belching smoke and armed with advanced weaponry, struck fear and awe into the Japanese people. The Tokugawa shogunate, unprepared for such a display of power, faced an immense dilemma: maintain their policy of isolation or risk confrontation with a technologically superior force. Perry presented a letter from U.S. President Millard Fillmore, demanding that Japan open its ports to American ships for trade and resupply. The shogunate, recognizing the threat posed by Perry's fleet, requested time to deliberate. Perry departed but promised to return the following year for an answer. True to his word, Perry returned in February 1854, this time with an even larger fleet. The shogunate, under immense pressure, agreed to negotiate. The resulting Treaty of Kanagawa, signed on March 31, 1854, marked the end of Japan's isolation. The treaty opened 2 ports, Shimoda and Hakodate, to American ships, provided for the safe treatment of shipwrecked sailors, and established a U.S. consulate in Japan. Though limited in scope, the treaty set a precedent for further foreign demands and signaled the weakening of the Tokugawa shogunate's authority. The impact of Perry's arrival extended far beyond diplomacy. Within Japan, the encounter exposed the nation's vulnerability to foreign powers and highlighted the need for modernization. The shogunate's inability to resist Western demands undermined its legitimacy, fueling domestic unrest and calls for reform. Samurai scholars and regional leaders debated the future of Japan, with some advocating for modernization to match Western advancements, while others sought to preserve traditional ways. The encounter with Perry and the subsequent opening of Japan to the world set the stage for the Meiji Restoration of 1868. This pivotal moment marked the end of the Tokugawa shogunate and the beginning of Japan's rapid transformation into a modern industrialized nation. Railways, factories, and Western-style institutions emerged, reshaping every aspect of Japanese life. Perry's arrival remains one of the most dramatic episodes in Japanese history, symbolizing the clash between tradition and progress. It was a moment of both crisis and opportunity, forcing Japan to confront its place in a rapidly changing world. The legacy of this encounter is a testament to Japan's resilience and ability to adapt, forging a path that would make it a global power in the decades to come. The Meiji era, spanning from 1868 to 1912, was one of the most transformative periods in Japanese history. Marked by rapid modernization and sweeping reforms, this era redefined Japan's position on the global stage, turning it from a feudal society into a modern, industrialized nation. The changes that unfolded during this time impacted governance, technology, education, and social structure. The Meiji Restoration began in 1868, when Emperor Meiji was restored to power, ending centuries of Tokugawa rule. This political shift dismantled the feudal system, abolishing the rigid class hierarchy. Farmers, artisans, and merchants gained new freedoms, while the privileges of the samurai class diminished. A landmark reform was the adoption of the Meiji Constitution in 1889, which established a constitutional monarchy. Modeled after Western systems, it introduced parliamentary governance while preserving the emperor's symbolic role. This blend of tradition and modernity became a hallmark of the era. Economic modernization was a key focus. Japan launched an industrialization program, building railways, factories, and shipyards. Modern financial institutions, including banks and a national currency, were established, laying the foundation for Japan's industrial power. Telegraph lines and railroads connected regions, while steam-powered ships revolutionized transportation. By the late Meiji period, Japan had become a leader in textiles, steel, and machinery. Education underwent a profound transformation. The Meiji leaders prioritized education, establishing a public school system and making it compulsory for boys and girls. Western subjects like science and mathematics were introduced alongside traditional studies, creating a skilled and knowledgeable workforce. Social changes were equally significant. The abolition of the samurai class and feudal practices enabled greater social mobility. Women, though still limited by traditional roles, saw incremental progress in education and public life. Western-style clothing and architecture gained popularity, blending with Japanese traditions to form a unique cultural identity. Military modernization was another priority. Inspired by Western powers, the Meiji government restructured its armed forces, introducing conscription and modern weaponry. This new strength was demonstrated in the Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, and the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, where Japan asserted itself as a dominant power in East Asia. However, rapid industrialization brought challenges. Factory workers faced harsh conditions, and traditional communities were disrupted. Tensions emerged between progress and preservation as old values eroded. Despite these difficulties, the Meiji era remains a defining chapter in Japan's history. It was a time of bold vision and determination as the nation embraced change to secure its place in a modernizing world. The legacy of this period continues to shape Japan, showcasing its resilience and adaptability. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895 marked Japan's emergence as a formidable military power in East Asia and its first major confrontation with China. This conflict, sparked by competing interests in Korea, demonstrated Japan's military modernization and strategic acumen, while exposing the weaknesses of the Qing dynasty. In the late 19th century, Korea was a focal point of rivalry between China and Japan. Both nations sought to exert influence over the Korean peninsula, a region of significant geopolitical importance. The spark for the conflict came in 1894, when a peasant rebellion broke out in Korea. The Korean government requested military assistance from China, which sent troops in accordance with prior agreements. However, Japan viewed this move as a challenge to its own interests and dispatched its forces to Korea, escalating tensions. Hostilities officially began in July 1894, when Japanese troops attacked Chinese forces near Seoul. Japan's military, recently restructured and equipped with modern weaponry, quickly demonstrated its superiority. The Japanese Navy achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of the Yalu River, securing control of crucial sea routes. Meanwhile, Japanese ground forces advanced with remarkable efficiency, capturing strategic locations such as Pyongyang and Port Arthur. The war revealed stark contrasts between the two nations' capabilities. Japan's disciplined troops, modern tactics, and advanced technology outclassed the Qing forces, which were plagued by outdated equipment, poor leadership, and low morale. The Japanese army's success was a testament to the country's commitment to modernization under the Meiji government. One of the most dramatic moments of the war was the capture of Port Arthur in November 1894. This strategic stronghold fell to the Japanese after intense fighting, symbolizing the Qing dynasty's inability to defend its territories. The Japanese victory at Port Arthur shocked the world and underscored the shifting balance of power in East Asia. The conflict concluded in April 1895 with the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki. The terms of the treaty were highly favorable to Japan. China recognized Korea's independence, effectively ending its traditional suzerainty over the peninsula. Additionally, Japan gained control of Taiwan, the Pescadores Islands, and the Liaodong Peninsula, though international pressure later forced Japan to return Liaodong. The treaty also included a substantial indemnity, further bolstering Japan's economy. The consequences of the Sino-Japanese War were profound. For Japan, the victory validated its modernization efforts and enhanced its international standing. The war demonstrated that Japan had joined the ranks of modern imperial powers capable of competing with Western nations. The acquisition of new territories and resources fueled Japan's industrial growth and strengthened its strategic position. In contrast, the defeat was a humiliating blow to China, exposing the weaknesses of the Qing government and accelerating calls for reform. The war underscored the urgent need for modernization, but internal divisions and resistance to change hindered China's progress. The Sino-Japanese War was a pivotal moment in Asian history. It marked the beginning of Japan's rise as a dominant regional power and set the stage for further conflicts in the 20th century. The war also highlighted the transformative impact of modernization, demonstrating how a nation could reshape its destiny through strategic reforms and determination. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 was a groundbreaking conflict that marked the first time an Asian nation defeated a European power in modern warfare. This war was fought over imperial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea, and its outcome not only reshaped the geopolitical landscape, but also established Japan as a dominant global power. Tensions between Russia and Japan had been brewing for years, fueled by competing interests in the resource-rich region of Manchuria and control over the Korean peninsula. Russia's expansionist policies in East Asia, particularly its occupation of Port Arthur and its influence over Korea, alarmed Japan. Negotiations failed to resolve these disputes, and Japan decided to take decisive action. The war began on February 8, 1904, when the Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. This bold move crippled the Russian naval presence in the Pacific and set the tone for the conflict. The Japanese military demonstrated superior planning, discipline, and adaptability, showcasing the effectiveness of its modernization efforts under the Meiji era. One of the most significant battles of the war was the siege of Port Arthur. Japanese forces laid siege to this heavily fortified Russian stronghold for months, employing innovative tactics and enduring heavy casualties. Despite fierce resistance, the Japanese army captured Port Arthur in January 1905. This victory was a turning point, dealing a severe blow to Russian morale and highlighting Japan's growing military prowess. Another key engagement was the Battle of Mukden, one of the largest land battles in history at the time. Japanese forces, outnumbered but better coordinated, achieved a hard-fought victory against the Russians. This battle underscored the importance of strategic planning and effective logistics, as Japan's ability to mobilize and sustain its forces outmatched Russia's disorganized efforts. The most decisive confrontation occurred at the Battle of Tsushima in May 1905. The Japanese Navy, under the command of Admiral Togo Heihachiro, annihilated the Russian Baltic Fleet, which had traveled halfway around the world to reinforce Russia's position. This stunning naval victory was unprecedented, cementing Japan's reputation as a formidable maritime power. The war concluded with the Treaty of Portsmouth in September 1905, brokered by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. The treaty recognized Japan's dominance in Korea, granted it control of the southern half of Sakhalin Island, and transferred Russian leases in Manchuria, including Port Arthur and the South Manchurian Railway, to Japan. Although Japan did not gain all the territory it desired, the treaty marked a significant diplomatic and strategic triumph. The Russo-Japanese War had far-reaching implications. For Japan, the victory validated its modernization efforts and demonstrated its ability to compete with Western powers on equal footing. The war bolstered national pride and solidified Japan's position as a rising imperial force. It also inspired other colonized nations, proving that a non-Western country could challenge and defeat a European power. For Russia, the defeat exposed deep weaknesses in its military and governance, fueling internal unrest that culminated in the 1905 revolution. The war underscored the need for reform, but also highlighted the challenges of maintaining a vast empire with outdated infrastructure and leadership. The Russo-Japanese War was a watershed moment in global history. It signaled the decline of traditional European dominance and the emergence of new powers on the world stage. For Japan, it was a defining moment of ambition, resilience, and transformation, marking its arrival as a major player in international politics. The invasion of China and the events leading up to World War II represent one of the most complex and consequential chapters in Japan's history. Beginning in the 1930s, Japan expanded aggressively into Chinese territory, driven by economic needs, a growing population, and a desire to assert dominance in Asia. The global economic depression exacerbated Japan's reliance on imports, fueling its expansionist ambitions. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria following the Mukden incident, a staged attack orchestrated by Japanese operatives. This led to the creation of the puppet state of Manchukuo, ruled nominally by the last Qing emperor, Puyi, but controlled entirely by Japan. The invasion highlighted Japan's militaristic approach to solving economic and political challenges. The League of Nations condemned Japan's actions, but the lack of strong international intervention emboldened Japanese militarists. By 1937, tensions escalated further with the Marco Polo Bridge incident near Beijing. This clash marked the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War, a brutal conflict that would later merge into the broader World War II. Cities across China, including Shanghai and Wuhan, became major battlegrounds, witnessing intense fighting and immense casualties. Japan's military campaigns were marked by extreme violence and atrocities. The most infamous example is the Nanking Massacre of 1937 to 1938, during which Japanese forces committed widespread atrocities, including mass killings, sexual violence, and looting. These actions left deep and lasting scars on Chinese-Japanese relations and are a stark reminder of the human cost of war. The scale and brutality of these campaigns shocked the international community, further isolating Japan diplomatically. Strategically, Japan aimed to dominate China's vast resources while eliminating opposition. Despite initial successes, including the capture of key cities and strategic locations, Japan faced stiff resistance from Chinese forces led by Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government and Mao Zedong's communist forces. The vastness of China's terrain and the determination of its population made it difficult for Japan to secure a decisive victory, leading to a protracted and costly conflict. Japan's supply lines were stretched thin, and its forces faced guerrilla warfare tactics that further hampered their progress. The conflict had significant regional implications. It destabilized the region, creating waves of refugees and economic devastation. The war also intensified anti-Japanese sentiment in Asia, sowing seeds of long-term mistrust. Meanwhile, Japan's focus on military campaigns in China distracted its leadership from addressing domestic economic issues, which were exacerbated by the ongoing conflict. By 1940, Japan's alignment with Germany and Italy through the Tripartite Pact further solidified its position among the Axis powers. This alliance heightened tensions with Western nations, particularly the United States, which responded by imposing severe economic sanctions, including an oil embargo. These measures placed immense pressure on Japan, further fueling its militaristic resolve and setting the stage for its attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, which marked Japan's formal entry into World War II. The invasion of China and the events leading up to World War II were pivotal in shaping the trajectory of modern Asia. They underscored the dangers of unchecked militarism and imperial ambition, resulting in devastating consequences for millions. For Japan, this period serves as a somber reminder of the complexities of power and the far-reaching impact of its actions on regional and global history. It also highlights the resilience and sacrifices of the Chinese people, whose struggle against invasion became a defining chapter in their nation's history. The fall of Japan during World War II marked one of the most dramatic and emotional turning points in global history. It was a conclusion defined by devastating atomic bombings, immense human loss, and the subsequent occupation that reshaped the nation forever. By 1945, Japan was on the brink of collapse. Years of relentless warfare had drained its resources, and Allied forces had gained significant ground in the Pacific theater. Strategic bombings by the United States had already devastated major Japanese cities, leaving millions homeless and the nation's infrastructure in ruins. Despite this, Japan's leadership refused to surrender, clinging to the hope of negotiating better terms. The situation reached its breaking point in August 1945. On August 6th, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The unprecedented power of the bomb obliterated the city, instantly killing tens of thousands and leaving countless others to suffer from severe injuries and radiation sickness. The once thriving metropolis was reduced to ash, and its surviving residents faced unimaginable horrors. The images of destruction and suffering shocked the world, offering a glimpse into the catastrophic potential of nuclear weapons. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Like Hiroshima, Nagasaki faced catastrophic destruction, with tens of thousands more lives lost. The blast left a lasting mark not only on the city's landscape, but also on the collective psyche of the Japanese people. Survivors, known as hibakusha, carried both physical and emotional scars, becoming symbols of resilience and a call for peace. The combined impact of the bombings forced the Japanese government to confront an undeniable reality. Continued resistance would lead to the total annihilation of their people and homeland. Emperor Hirohito, breaking with tradition, directly addressed the nation on August 15, 1945, announcing Japan's surrender. His radio broadcast, the first ever by a Japanese emperor, conveyed a somber acceptance of defeat, marking the end of World War II. For many Japanese citizens, it was the first time they heard their emperor's voice, and his words carried profound emotional weight, signaling the start of a new and uncertain chapter. Following the surrender, Japan entered a period of occupation led by Allied forces, primarily under the command of the United States. General Douglas MacArthur oversaw the reconstruction and demilitarization of Japan. The occupation brought sweeping reforms, including the drafting of a new constitution, which established Japan as a democratic nation and renounced war as a means of settling disputes. These reforms reshaped Japan's political landscape, granting greater rights to women and emphasizing education and social equality. The post-war trials, known as the Tokyo trials, held Japanese leaders accountable for war crimes. These trials were a pivotal moment in international law, setting precedents for prosecuting crimes against humanity. They also forced Japan to confront its wartime actions and atrocities, including those committed during its invasions of neighboring countries. The trials were controversial, with some arguing they represented victors' justice, but they undeniably played a role in shaping Japan's post-war identity. The atomic bombings and subsequent occupation reshaped Japan's identity. The devastation led to a collective commitment to peace, with the horrors of war etched deeply into the nation's memory. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols of the need for nuclear disarmament, and Japan emerged from the ashes with a renewed focus on economic growth and international cooperation. The country's recovery was nothing short of remarkable, transforming it into one of the world's leading economies within decades. This chapter in Japan's history remains a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences of war and the resilience of the human spirit. It highlights the capacity for nations to rebuild, reconcile, and strive for a future where such tragedies are never repeated. The fall of Japan was not only the end of an era, but also the beginning of a transformation that would shape its modern identity. From the ruins of war, Japan rose to become a beacon of peace and innovation, proving that even in the darkest moments, the seeds of renewal can take root and flourish. Japan's path from feudal isolation to a global economic giant is a story of ambition, innovation, and overcoming challenges. Today, Japan continues to have a significant impact on the global economy and culture, and its example serves as an inspiration for countries around the world.